Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Well, there's no doubt that COVID-19 has dominated the headlines this week. It has become a health emergency, and there's a sentiment of grave concern hanging over the country at present. While the health and safety of the public is paramount, there is increasing anxiety creeping into the business community concerning the adverse impact which COVID-19 may have for them. This week, the Department of Business, Enterprise and Innovation announced a range of supports for the businesses affected by the coronavirus, which included a €200 million Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland working capital scheme for eligible businesses impacted by COVID-19. Loans of up to €1.5 million will be available at reduced rates, with up to the first 500,000 unsecured. Applications for this can be made through the SBCI website. The department also introduced a €200 million package for enterprise supports, including a rescue and restructuring scheme available through Enterprise Ireland for vulnerable but viable firms that need to restructure or transform their business. The maximum loan available through Microfinance Ireland has increased from €25,000 to €50,000 as an immediate measure to specifically deal with exceptional circumstances that micro-enterprises, that is sole traders and firms of up to 9 staff, are facing. Applications can be made through the Microfinance Ireland website or through the Wexford Local Enterprise Office. Also, the Credit Guarantee Scheme will be available to COVID-19 impacted firms through the pillar banks. Loans of up to €1 million will be available at terms of up to 7 years. The local enterprise offices in every county will also be providing vouchers from €2,500 to €10,000 on a 50-50 match funding basis to support business continuity preparedness, innovation and productivity. For Enterprise Ireland clients, a Finance and Focus grant of €7,200 will be available to businesses that want to access consultancy support to undertake immediate finance reviews. As you can see, there's no shortage of financial supports and advice available for businesses in the face of the coronavirus, and I would certainly urge local businesses to avail of these supports without delay. Now, staying on the topic of COVID-19, my first guest, Tom Cusack from Enterprise Ireland, joins me now to discuss the impact of this pandemic on Irish businesses. Tom, have Enterprise Ireland clients been in contact with you about the threat which the coronavirus poses?
Good morning, Karl, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with your listeners this morning. Well, Karl, this is obviously a very serious and challenging situation that continues to escalate and change on a daily basis. We've been in touch with our clients on a daily basis over the last few weeks, and it's really for us to get an understanding of what the challenges might be for the companies and how we as an agency at Enterprise Ireland can support them.
So what are you hearing from businesses in that respect?
Well, I suppose that there's 2 areas that companies are mainly affected, and that's obviously in terms of their customers and in terms of their supply chain. In terms of customers, any situation that creates uncertainty or volatility impacts on the markets, and you see situations that where investment decisions are deferred or delayed or redeployed, and investments in potential infrastructure or technology. So this causes challenges in terms of customers. And then on the supply chain side, it's understanding where exactly the supply chain leads to, where there are areas where the virus may have impacted supply chains, as China being one obviously example for that. So a lot of companies that would source components or parts in China may see delays in their supply chain and really need to understand what those delays may mean and what they need to put in place to support business continuity over the coming weeks and months.
And of course, in recent years, Enterprise Ireland have focused a lot of attention with their clients in relation to lean management. And as a consequence of that, just-in-time production, is that backfiring now as a result?
Well, what we're seeing is for a lot of the companies, because we're just coming out of the Chinese New Year holiday in China and the Lunar New Year holidays across Asia, a lot of companies would have stockpiled, because this is a time of year where there tends to be some delays in Chinese operations ramping up after the holiday season. So generally companies have stockpiled. So we're not seeing an immediate impact, but we expect that over the next weeks or months that we'll start to see some gaps appear, but it's wider than just supply chain. It's also just the cost of doing business, the cost of logistics in and out of China, etc., is having an impact on bottom line for companies.
Now, the Department of Business has published a business continuity plan. What are the main planning activities that should be taken?
There's probably three areas that we'd recommend to companies to focus on in the short term, and the first one is around the HR and the business functions. The second is around supply and customer management, and the third is just around communication. So I might just take each of those one by one and just give a few lines on them. But in terms of the HR and business functions, the first we would say is to nominate a lead person or a lead coordinator within the business who would manage your business continuity plans and centralise all aspects of that within the business. Secondly, understand staff travel. Understand where your staff are due to travel over the next couple of weeks, where they may be meeting customers, where they may be attending trade fairs or exhibitions, and just to ensure that there's staff safety at all times and adhere to local travel advisories and monitor the travel advisory given by the Department of Foreign Affairs and using their TravelWise app. And thirdly, just under HR and business functions, I'd say review flexibility in working arrangements or consider alternate teams of employees, etc., if you have operations in some of the affected areas. On the supplier and customer management side, I'd say firstly, obviously, speak with your customers and understand their concerns. And secondly, understand the supply chain. So identify the essential suppliers, understand where the product is originating and if there may be delays. The challenge for a lot of companies is in some cases they don't actually understand the full supply chain. So products or services they may be sourcing closer to home may actually originate in China or in some of the affected areas. So it's really just to understand the full supply chain, and then to develop a plan on how or when they need to activate alternative suppliers or identifying alternative suppliers closer to home, both here in Ireland or in Europe as a next step. And the final piece from our side is really the communications, and that is key. So the communications, both internal and external, appointing a coordinator within the business to disseminate all communications regarding COVID-19 and ensuring that your own staff have very clear understanding of their roles and responsibility and your advisories around staff travel, etc. And finally, developing that clear message for customers and suppliers in terms of your own response as a company around COVID-19.
And of course, there's lots of complications when it does come to a supply chain, because if you have a product with 1,000 pieces in it and one of them is coming out of China, you may have issues in relation to the certification of your product.
Well, this is where it's really important to really understand the full supply chain and understand where there may be alternative suppliers. This is such a fluid situation. I think people are really just coming to terms with understanding the full situation and understanding the full supply chain, but that is a really important point, I think, for companies at this stage, is really just spend the time to understand their suppliers and the wider chain.
And in terms of identifying alternative suppliers, one of the issues with that is it's not something that can be done overnight.
Correct. That can take time, but again, this is what business continuity planning is about, and contingency planning is at any time for a business. It's important to run through these scenarios outside of an emergency like we're currently seeing with COVID-19. But it can take time, and it will lead to delays. And it's something that we would urge companies to start immediately, regardless of where their supply chain is coming from. It's just to be very clear on the originating, of where it originates, and if there are alternative sources that they could start to look at this point.
How to determine the point at which a business may need to scale back or suspend operations? What advice are you giving to businesses in that regard?
That's the individual business decision in terms of the companies themselves, the CEOs of the businesses will know at which point, if their supply chain is challenged or compromised in any which way, that they cannot supply product. But that's ultimately a decision for the business. And
now, one of the problems that we're hearing about is that companies involved in manufacturing are finding it difficult to find somewhere now to store the products that they have manufactured. They've run out of space in their own warehousing facilities.
Well, then it's maybe look at alternatives that are near to home where they may store the product in the interim as things move. The reality is that the situation will change over the next couple of weeks and months, and where they're having challenges with customers, we certainly expect that will improve and the markets will open up again. So where companies may be compromised at that level, I'd say there's probably interim measures that may be taken in terms of storage closer to home.
As we finish the interview, what are the key points of advice that you have for any businesses that may be worrying about the coronavirus and its impact on their business?
I would say firstly to any of the Enterprise Ireland client companies to get in touch with their development advisors at Enterprise Ireland, just to have a conversation about what the potential impacts are, what their understanding is of the potential impacts, and discuss what potential supports we may be able to offer through the international network in terms of support around customers, etc. And the main message I'd like to leave with your listeners today is really around the preparedness piece. We cannot emphasise that enough. It's really important for business owners to put in place business continuity plans, focus on those three areas. As I mentioned, the HR and the business functions, the supplier and the customer management, and communications. That's the clear message for people: is be prepared, invest the time in it now, while to allow CEOs and founders and business owners to really have a clear understanding of the supply chain in the first instance and the customer challenges.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Tom Cusack from Enterprise Ireland, and I would like to thank Tom for sharing his advice with us this morning.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast.